We're now recording this. So I'm going to go straight into the first question. The question we've had is, the legislation is due to come into force in November. Do the panel consider the rules, implementation and information requirements to be clear, or are we likely to have different interpretations from different authorities on different sites? John, I'll start with you on that one. If you can give us your thoughts, that would be great.
Okay. The legislation will hopefully be clear. It'll be in black and white. However, there will be some interpretation, I'm sure, at the finer detail where LPAs will take a differing opinion, and I guess it'll probably take quite a while, probably some planning appeals here and there to bottom out some of the approaches that different LPAs will take. I mean, the metric itself, which is the tool for the nuts and bolts of BNG, there is lots of room for debate within that itself. You know, the actual requirements of the legislation, I think, should be pretty clear cut. But yeah, BNG as a topic, like a lot of things, will always have room for debate. It's, you know, ecology isn't a black and white science. You know, two people will look at things differently, and therefore you will have debate. So should we all kind of know where we're going? Yes, we should come November, hopefully. But will there always be a bit of variation in debates depending on how picky LPAs are or the individual officers' views? I think that will always exist. Yeah. And
on the individual officer's view is a real sore point from my perspective in architecture and planning. But do LPAs have their own ecologists, or do they defer back to Devon? Is there a slightly more central or consistent view there?
So there's been a lot of money released by the government. I say a lot of money, a fair chunk of money released by the government to LPAs to try and recruit more ecologists. So that is definitely the intention of government. At the moment, Cornwall are in the process of replacing ecologists, but they will have in-house. Somerset have a centralised ecology service team called Somerset Ecology Services, and so do Dorset. And then here in Devon, you have some LPAs have their own ecologists, such as Teambridge, Exeter, East Devon, and then some rely on Devon County Council.
Okay.
But Devon County Council are recruiting for a BNG person that will overarch all of Devon as well.
Okay, thanks. Ben, is it clear what we're getting into?
I would say at the moment not. I share John's hope that it's going to be clearer come November, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And even when we have the legislation, what are the 106 requirements for securing this going to look like? What are different local authorities going to request? Are they going to request 106? Is it going to be conservation covenants? What are the rates of biodiversity net gain? Is it going to be a minimum of 10%? Is it going to be more than that? What are the different councils going to require as part of the application? And what's going to be required as part of the condition later? I mean, something that interests me, and I'd be very interested where this goes. How much of this can you get approved at the application stage and to front load it all? And how much of it are we going to have to then approve at the condition stage? And at the moment, I mean, obviously there are two separate stages, but the amount of information required in each one is far from certain at the moment. So I think that's an interesting area, and also information on how much it's going to, like, maintenance costs, maintenance requirements. I speak to some local authorities who are saying this might be a good opportunity to suddenly start maintaining, taking land back and maintaining it, rather than taking it to a maintenance management company, because they're concerned about the ability of the management company to do this. Others are like, but to do that, we'd then need to have a large sort of commuted sum. Is that doable? That's an upfront capital cost. Some have told me that they're thinking about setting up a maintenance unit and charging other developers and councils for this as a service. This is up here where I am in the Midlands. There's a lot of concern about maintenance.
Okay.
So
there's no real, you're not seeing any real clarity at this stage, and you've just said something that scares the life out of me in the current experiences of trying to get applications validated. No, that's fine, but trying to get applications validated, you know, John and Tom and everyone will know that actually the information we're having to provide up front now, even for validation, let alone determination. So if they start throwing in this level of complexity pre-validation, which will be a great way of them dealing with their excessive workload, it's basically just close the doors. But I suppose that's not something that we can answer now.
No.
Mike, we're going to come back to you on this one. Just to let everyone know, Mike's having some issues with his microphone and his camera will be off. But Mike, can you give us your thoughts on the current position with regards to clarity on information? What are you finding in terms of looking at sites at the moment?
Yeah. So hopefully I'm not too much like a Dalek, but tell me if I am, and we'll have to, well, like we can do. Yeah, my answer is it's incredibly difficult to really understand what requirements are going to be, given the fact that we've been trying and I suppose more complicated options that have already been signed, etc. Over the past probably 12 months or so, and actually the information is differing from different people. So I think we can slightly clearer now, but the point that Ben probably made around different authorities, is it going to be 10%, or I'm aware of a number of authorities who are possibly looking at 10% as well. So it's getting early, and really from my point of view, it's how do you capitalise the costs that we actually deal with. There's two routes forward in terms of either into the man code cost.
Mike, I'm gonna have to speak. Yeah, we're getting every second or third word, I'm afraid.
Oh no.
I'm not sure if there's anything we can do. Yeah, if we can sort of part this one, I'll come back to you on another question. If we can try and do something on that, it would be good to hear. Yeah, your opinion is valuable, but yeah, at the moment it's really hard to understand what you're saying. Tom, do you see any issues, any clarity in what's coming through from your experience, or are you just sort of sitting there waiting to see how it unfolds?
Well, I mean, from dealing with us, I mean, we take a lot of steer and have done for the past sort of 12, 18 months from the ecologists that we deal with on projects down in the southwest. I mean, as far as the institute's concerned, the Landscape Institute, obviously there's a model that we need to be aware of and get on board with. We take the lead that, that the DEFRA biodiversity metric uses a biodiversity units rather than sort of habitat areas and qualities to assess biodiversity. And that Natural England, the guide there, as far as the instructions or the information that we're provided with to assist the users in interpreting the requirements, in the hope that that will prevent users from sort of inadvertently specifying potentially sort of inappropriate compensatory sort of measures with what we need to do. But what we tend to do with our ecologists at the minute, and on a lot of the projects that we work around in the Torbay area that are close to sort of AOMB and what have you, is we've been working on gearing up to provide this sort of 10% net gain.
Okay. And
haven't really stumbled on any major issues in terms of the practicalities of delivering that yet, but I'm nowhere near sort of on the same level of knowledge on this as John and Ben are. I'm purely just an experiential perspective that I've got on that.
Please don't apologize. If you're going to apologize for that shirt and logo clash. But in terms of your experience, I'm more than comfortable that your contribution.
I'll do a Mike Smith and turn my camera off.
No, not at all. It's nice to have some colour. Right, thank you for that, guys. It's yeah, I think the sort of the clear understanding is there's pockets of it should be simple, but we're going to have to just watch this space and see how it unfolds for the delivery. John, this is the second question that we've had through. I think it's going to land squarely with you, so I'll come back to you again. One of the contributors is aware of the talk of off-site credits being available as a third option for BNG provision. So on-site is the first preference. or offsite on other land owned locally is the second preference, and then buying through a bank. And obviously, as you've seen this coming and you've set up a business, are there any schemes currently in place? Is this going to be an open market commodity with the potential for ransom values, or will it be regulated? So, John, what are your views on that one?
Okay, so yes, it's designed to be a three-step process. So the government want you to deal with it on site where you can. If you can't, and I guess that's a big area of contention as to what deems you've tried hard enough. Like, I would like someone to explain to me how viability fits into PNG. But anyway, if you've got an agreed position where you are going off-site, then you can go to where you can either provide the off-site solution yourself, or you can do it via a third party such as Biogains, which is the company I've set up. That off-site solution, a lot of developers I speak to, they sort of say, oh yeah, we'll be all right, we've got a bit of land. And I keep stressing to them, it's not having the bit of land that's usually the problem, it's finding someone to manage it to a conservation management plan for 30 years that's the problem, and taking liability to do so as well. That's the tricky bit that most developers are not so keen on. And then the third string, if you can't do that, is you can buy a credit, not a unit, a credit from the Secretary of State. But the government's intention is they're going to be so expensive that it really is a last resort. So going back to that middle option of offsetting habitat banking, yes, the government's intention is it's an open market system where supply and demand will dictate how the market runs. It will be regulated by a competent authority. So in most instances, that will be a local planning authority, but other people could register to become a competent authority. So you could have like a wildlife trust, for example, could become a competent authority. Natural England tell me so far no one else has registered to become one, but I'm sure they will. So they would take initial responsibility. So they would review, for example, the ecology to say whether what's being proposed off-site is suitable, the management plan suitable. You also have to have a legal agreement in place on that land that secures it for the 30 years. So they would be checking that. And it all only becomes viable, this is post-November, if it's uploaded onto the National Register. So there'll be a gains register for on-site and off-site. And certainly the off-site stuff will have to have a gain plan, so like an ecology report as such, but it'll also have to have the metric uploaded, and importantly, it'll have to have a legal agreement securing the land for the 30 years for biodiversity. So that is the way it's going to work. In terms of, are there any schemes open and available now? So Biogains, our model is to have habitat bank in every LPA in the Southwest. And we are in advanced talks in pretty much every LPA now. We've got some over the line and a lot are at sort of legal stage, which is it's quite complicated, the legals. But we're confident come November we'll be in a pretty good position to better support people. And I should plug our competitors. There aren't many of them, but most of you will have heard of the Environment Bank. So they're a national version really of what we're doing, with a slightly different model. And they are looking to provide solutions nationwide, whereas Biogains is more Southwest focused.
Okay,
so, yeah.
That's great, thanks. Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tony. So I agree with everything that John just said. I mean, the structure is there. Whether, I mean, the legislation says we should be getting an indication as to, they should be telling us what the government credit is, price 6 months in advance. 6 months has been and gone, and we still haven't seen that. My advice would be to watch this space and see what comes out in the next few weeks. But of course, when we do get the pricing for the credit, that's kind of the long stop, as John said, and that's going to help all of us deal with then what the price of off-site credits are going to be worth. And that's the only thing I can really add on to what John's been saying is, yes, we're creating it. There's government guidance out there about taking your baseline, creating the habitat, running it through the metric, creating these units. What we don't yet know is how much these units are going to be worth. And I would say that the price of these units, it's going to be a market. So it's going to, we don't know what it's going to be yet, but we're going to get a much better indication when we work out what the credits are, because we know, for example, that the off-site biodiversity unit is not going to cost more than the government credit. Otherwise, people are just going to go straight out and get the government credit rather than the off-site unit. So we're going to get a much clearer picture when this information is released. about the government credit, and for me, it is the pricing. Many people I've been speaking to are very concerned as what it could be, because you've got a large development. £10,000 difference in the unit price is going to make a massive impact on viability and whether the scheme can go forward.
Okay.
So
I could probably give you a little bit of an insight, because I think, Tony, am I right in thinking most people on this session are Southwest based?
No, we've got people from Australia, from
Oh wow,
Southeast, from
fine. I was going to
North.
say, I've got an idea of some indicating pricing if you would like, if that's of interest.
I think, yeah, there are plenty of us from the Southwest, so any sort of guidance I think would be valuable.
So the benchmarks we've got out there are Cornwall Council will take payments to deliver BNG units themselves, and they're charging £28,500 per biodiversity unit. Nothing to do with number of houses, just for a metric unit. And I know Cornwall Wildlife Trust are charging about 32,000. I've also seen some recent pricing from the Environment Bank, and theirs varies between sort of £28,000 and £35,000 in the quote that I saw, and that was for different habitat types. And at Biogains, we're sort of looking to benchmark off of other people and a cost up basis on what we think it's going to cost us to deliver. But again, we're thinking it's going to be between sort of £25,000 and £30,000 a unit. Seems to be the kind of field that I've been picking up.
Okay, I'm gonna have to follow up on that one, because what's a unit?
Well, this is key, because you should be thinking about what the price is going to be for the type of habitat provided by that unit, because that could well be a differential.
It could, yeah.
So it could be cheaper to provide forest than it is to provide grassland because of the maintenance requirements, etc.
But what you have within BNG, you have trading rules. So what you provide, whether it's on-site or off-site, is dictated slightly by what you're losing. So if you are losing, for example, a woodland, you're losing a small corner of woodland on your site, you couldn't replace that with grassland unless it was some super duper exceptional grassland. Even a nice meadow wouldn't be allowed to offset that, because they're in different categories within the metric. So you couldn't just say, right, I want to buy some wildflower meadow units, please. It has to tie in to a degree what you're losing.
Okay, thanks. Tom, the idea of credits, is that something that you're going to be exposed to, or do you want to keep clear of that sort of debate?
Well, I'll tell you, I sat and tried to do due diligence last night by reading through all the business around the units and things and bits and bobs like that, and it fried my brain sufficiently enough for me to not want to comment on it right now. But all I do know is, just off the back of what the two chaps have said prior, is this promise that the costs are going to be released ahead of the November when the policy hits.
6 months ahead.
So well that's not happened then. Okay. So but yeah, good luck to everybody with that one. Okay.
Mike, I'm going to come back to you shortly. I'm going to unless you've got a burning desire to throw something into the ring on that one, I've got a couple of more pertinent questions I think for you. So if you want to chip in on that, let me know. If not, I shall move on.
No, that's fine. I'm hoping you can hear me better, but yeah, I'll answer one later.
So far, so good. We'll come back on that one. Thanks. So the next question we've got is, when looking at a new site appraisal, is there a general assessment mechanism to establish potential scope and cost, or does the site need to have undergone an ecological assessment? And if so, is this something the seller is likely to have to do to sell it? Actually, Mike, if you do sound clearer, and I know this is squarely in your world because you look at new opportunities. So what are your thoughts on that one when you're looking at appraising a new opportunity?
So yeah, hopefully you can hear me. This is exactly the problem we've been stumbling across for the last 6-10 months or whatever, is understanding exactly what the costs are, and how you whether or not you actually put the future maintenance onto Manco, or whether there will be an easier way of, well, in effect, putting it into the credits. I mean, I think that there's two things really, aren't there, or three. If you provide it on site, which is clearly the route that is the preference, it's about making sure there's actually enough space, and what number of units, etc., you end up losing, which hopefully won't be too bad. But we've had an instance where we've had a site where the area was proposed to be bigger than the site itself, which clearly wasn't right. But that's the type of problem we've come across. So we didn't bother going with that site, when actually I think if you reassessed it now, you'd probably end up with a different response.
So can I just pick up on that? So when you say a different response from whom? Is that from Natural England or from the county ecology?
So this is through the ecologists we've been dealing with, which is, I think this is a problem that everybody suffered without absolute understanding of what's happening. I think we've ended up with our own consultants probably not providing 100% the right answer. And I think things are getting clearer now.
Okay.
But it very much that's some of the issues we've been facing going up until now, and I think sort of viability wise, clearly it should tie into the land price you pay. But how do you actually value what that is, and you're still in a competitive land market? So if you end up having bought a site or agreed the price, and then there's extra costs, then that's a viability issue for the developer. If you know it up front, then potentially it starts to come off the land price. But until you get a stable situation where it's been around for a while and you're putting bids in with a known cost, at the moment, all I can see is it coming off the development value, that's the developer's costs. And in terms of future maintenance, putting it in the manco might seem an easy route, but there's a cost involved in that, and there's only a certain amount of money can a purchaser pay annually, and there are more and more costs being put onto manco. We always put our suds, and quite often now with larger sites you put in the SANGS cost and various other things, and at some point you tip the balance where you actually say that the annual maintenance fee for a manco is unattractive for a future purchaser, and at that point you then have to either pump prime it or look at other management techniques. And I think this is where the BNG element of everybody think it's simple, we'll just put it in the manco. And
I'm guessing as a developer, where you're, the first thing when you're looking at committing to a new project is assessing risk. So as a developer, you kind of you have to front load that in your valuations, I guess.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. But it's still a competitive land market, and I think this is the difficulty at the moment is it's knowing what the costs and the risks are and making a sensible judgment about what it involves. And to be honest, at the moment, I don't think we have all the information to make those judgments.
No. Okay, thanks for that. Tom, do you have a magic bullet where you can sit and say, I can produce this, this, and this, and it'll give you your answers?
Not really, no. I mean, I'm just sat here thinking and listening, and I just from experience, and maybe just to sort of try and put it into like sort of layman's terms, which is how I best deal with things. When we look at a site, I had a conversation recently with one of our clients that is currently going through the process of converting a touring park into one of these sort of high-end, sort of fairly exclusive lodge parks with permanent fixed sort of structures in it. And as it stands on the face of it, this site, to all intents and purposes, is just a field. It's a heavily sort of managed field with, in return of the environmental assessment of that site, very low.
We've lost you, Tom. You've vanished and voice is gone.
Can you hear me
back? Yeah, you're back.
Right, I'm not doing.
No, you're doing fine, mate. So you
I missed the Claypole impression from Rent-A-Ghost. So that's it.
That dates you, but well done.
So when we started talking about the BNG with the client. The client's immediate responses is they're going to sort of like lose units. They're going to have to make room for these sort of, for the BNG in order to hit the 10%. And in layman's terms, in a situation like that where there's an existing low value associated with the site, it's relatively easy to put both the development and features in that are going to achieve the 10% net gain. But I think from an outset, in terms of when somebody's first looking at a site or a project, we always bring an ecologist in. With the majority, 99.9% of our sites, top of the list is, after we've spoken to them, as a turnkey provider, which is what we sort of consider ourselves to be at Grow, an ecology assessment will be one of the first things, and that will be based on working towards what may or may not need to happen in terms of that sort of 10%, and we're already sort of set up to looking at that for us. And yes, it's the 30-year management thing, which I know is a few questions ahead.
Yeah, but it's all of these things, they're pre-acquisition costs, aren't they? And so when as a developer you're looking a bit of line, is how much do you spend, as Mike mentioned, when you're in a competitive tender, how much do you spend?
And we're used to producing a 5-year management plan as part of our standard details and notes with a landscape framework, or costs associated with a 30-year management plan, and who's going to sort of carry it out, management company, and all, the knowledge. I think there's an awful lot of knowledge to be had over the coming years before things can sort of fall into place and real costs can be associated. Okay.
No, that's yeah. We're unpicking it. We're not getting solutions, but it does feel to me like we're unpicking where the issues are that we're going to have to be focusing on. So thanks for that. I've just had a message from Barry, who has identified that there's a screening tool, biodiversity screening tool, online. John, is that something and Barry's going to share that in the chat box for anyone who's interested. John, is that something you've come across, or is it?
No, okay. I'm curious to see what that is. It might be something to do with the small sites metric, which is aimed at assessment by a layperson, rather than an ecologist. So it might be that. But so 2 things on the last question I was going to add. First of all, in terms of helping site selection, land values, etc. So with my consultant hat on, we frequently, for house builders now, go out, do a baseline assessment. We run a series of assumptions on the development to give a likely BNG score that goes into their land bid. So there's people, I can already see names on this call that we do that for already. So the baseline we can record accurately. So that's something we can have a definitive answer on, what is the unit position of the baseline. Not a huge piece of work. Then we'll either discuss with them, or if they haven't really got into contribute, we'll make our own assumptions. So we would do something like, of the site, we would assume, say, 70% or 60% is going to be built area, and the remaining 30 or 40% is going to be SUDS and POS. Within the built area, we'll assume a 70-30 split between sealed surface and vegetated garden. And within the POS, we'll make our own assumptions as to what percentage we feel we could get a decent habitat away with, and what would probably be more of an amenity space. So we list the assumptions, and they are broad brush. But based on the baseline, we run those assumptions, and we'll provide the developer with a likely scenario. And we've seen everything from, nice 30-40% gain through to minus 200% loss. And, we've worked with some house builders that have dropped a site there and then when they've seen, and it's usually because the baseline's very high. So you can do that. Any developer can do that. There is cost involved, of course, but you're not talking exorbitant costs. And it's really understanding the baseline, because if you're buying a site into you, it looks fine, it's just a grassland, but to the ecologist, it happens to be pretty nice grassland that's going to score very highly in the metric. It's just probably not a good site to develop, to be quite frank. And so you can get that checked at bid stage.
Okay, thanks for that. Ben,
I'm just going to add to those. Yeah,
I'm just thinking. So John's been out, done his baseline assessment. They've made a successful bid on the basis of that. The ecology goes in, and then the local authority ecologist doesn't agree, and costs go through the roof. Is that grist to your mill? Are you going to sit there and put your gloves on and take the local authorities on and say,
Yeah,
This is where it is.
There's no reason really for them to debate the baseline. It's a fact-driven science on the whole. Bits and bobs could be debated, but we've probably done 200-300 live BNG assessments of developments already, and we haven't really had anything where we haven't resolved it with the LPA in terms of what the baseline is. They will accept professional judgment 99% of the time, so that's not really the debate. The problem comes is you give someone an indicative position, and then as developments grow and change and everything, the space that's left for habitats afterwards becomes marginalized, and you struggle to deliver the 10%. And that's the bit what I'm interested in. Ben might better contribute on this, is it sufficient for a developer to turn around and say, well, we've tried to deliver on site, but we can't, when they could just lose some units to deliver it? Where does viability come in as an acceptable point to go off site? Because no one's really ever explained that to me. But it's an obvious debate, because we have LPA ecologists coming back to us on projects saying, well, you haven't tried everything because you haven't tried losing housing. Yeah, okay. That there are a lot of questions around viability, but I think this is that until we start getting into this, it's going to be hard to understand. Ben, where are you on this one?
I mean, yeah, that is a fascinating question. I've had it on one of the sites I've got at the moment where it was obviously not mandatory biodiversity net gain, but within the policy, and we were arguing in that case viability to reduce the amount, the percentage, and again the argument came up of, well, just lose some units. What's going to be interesting with mandatory net gain, as we mentioned before, is that the viability argument doesn't apply to the biodiversity. So it's going to be a really interesting question.
But it does apply. The viability argument does apply to affordable housing. So if we push it too far down one route, then suddenly, well, okay, we'll have to deliver fewer affordable housing units.
To give someone a picture of this, a bit of detail on this, we're working on a scheme for a PLC house build at the moment, and they're having wranglings with the LPA on BNG. And they asked, and they were something like 1.5 units out in BNG from the position they need to be at. And they asked us to calculate how many houses they'd have to lose. And it was 25 units for 1.5 biodiversity units. So it's an absolute no-brainer. If you think a unit's going to cost, say, £25,000, 1.5 units at £25,000 is obviously significantly better than losing 25 plots. So because BNG's worked out on the area needed to generate a unit of BNG is quite big. So in other words, it's multiple plots. So it very rarely will stack up. It will always be cheaper to go off site than lose plots.
Yeah,
but
cool.
I'm interested in where the policy will allow an LPA to insist on losing plots. That's going to be the really interesting bit.
I haven't seen anything yet on that, but yes.
No. that actually quite nicely leads us on to our next question, which we'll start with you on, Ben, if that's okay, which is contributor believes the requirement 30-year maintenance period will obviously be funded through the resident service charges. Managed companies able to provide realistic costs for this, and do the LPAs have the resources to enforce it? So that question is around enforcing the maintenance, but also in terms of, I'm just thinking legal challenge, appeal, application is turned down on the basis of not providing appropriate BNG. Viability argument doesn't support. Where does that run legally, Ben?
I mean, that's the enforcement is enforcement to maintenance, and then the enforcement of that is just a really big issue. It's a real concern to local authorities. It's a hidden cost. You don't know how you need to factor that in. You don't know how local authorities are going to work it out. Obviously, if you're dealing with maintaining SUDs at the moment, local authorities will understand. They'll have a way of calculating what the dowry charge, what the commuted sum would be to the management company. This is uncharted territory, and I suppose to an extent it depends on the type of habitat, the extent of that habitat, how spread out that habitat is, whether there's any economies of scale, whether it's near other things which are being managed in a similar way, the skills of if a local authority want to manage it, the skills of their maintenance teams. there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of how much it's going to cost to maintain, and then how much it's going to cost to enforce. I mean, it's an absolute nightmare for a local authority to be going around and checking whether certain biodiversity works and things are in a certain standard, especially when there will obviously be those residents which are very keen in making or with keeping that biodiversity there. But I imagine there will also be pressures from those, if you're paying the management fee, to say, can't we just mow this? Can't we just get this down and do it? And there'll be that pressure to try and reduce the management fee, which might incentivize people not to be reporting it as much. So whilst the bigger sites, which are more obvious, are likely to be easier to enforce via tip-offs, if the council allows smaller parts of biodiversity land on site, I don't know if they're going to get the tip-offs. And I genuinely, knowing as I do working with local authority enforcement teams, I don't think they've got the proactive resource to be going out and inspecting all of these. But I could be shown wrong. The local authorities might adapt this with vigor, but there's definitely funding issues, and there's definitely just the scale of it could well be a big problem.
Ben, who's liable at that point?
I don't mean to be provocative, but one of the things you said there, Ben, about uncertainty, my understanding that his uncertainty is grist to a lawyer's meal, isn't it?
Oh, we love a bit of uncertainty, you know, change and uncertainty. That's what we like.
As John's mentioned, who's liable?
Yeah, who's liable?
Where does that sit?
Is it the householders who are on the board of directors for the Manco, or how's, you know? So
this is a key consideration. So obviously, if the land is as it would have been 15 years ago, taken on, transferred for £1 with a commuted sum to the local authority, it would be the local authority. That's not that likely to happen anymore. So it's likely to be the Manco set up. The Manco ultimately gets its funds from the residents. Obviously, as a developers, we'll be looking to exit the site completely and not have any skin in the game, any ownership within the site. So yes, it would fall down to individual Mancos, and it's a difficult one, because if you've got the Manco maintaining things like the suds or the play area, residents have a vested interest in making sure that the flooding works and the playground safe for the children. So that's almost self-regulating. They'll do that. But is it going to work? Is there going to be the temptation to cut corners with biodiversity? And then even worse, if the council then needs to take action and has to go against residents for doing it, that's not a very palatable thing for a local authority to do, especially if it's going to cost a significant amount of money. So there is a real question mark over this, because the liability, John, would be, as you say, with residents. And
who's going to volunteer to be on a residents panel if they can go to jail for not enforcing something?
but yeah.
We've got a few questions to get through, and they're kind of interlinked. So I'm going to move this one on slightly and bring it to you, Tom, which is, so that question was around the issues of enforcement. So we've got, there are two directions for that. One is through that planning process and the delivery phase of, what we can actually deliver. The other is the maintenance. In terms of ongoing maintenance, are you looking at strategies in terms of your landscape design? I'm sort of coming from a direction, I suppose, of maintenance or ongoing maintenance viability in producing solutions, landscape solutions that are easier to maintain. Is that something that can be done? Can we look at more sort of a more commercial approach to how this is delivered, or for ongoing maintenance?
Well, listen, when I looked through the questions yesterday when they came through, this was the one that I considered to be the one that falls more smack bang into my sort of domain as a landscape architect. As I mentioned earlier, we already are obligated to provide a 5-year management strategy or plan as part of our sort of detailed submissions. But I think this is where it falls to the landscape managers for how these sites have progressed. The legislation and whatever covenants are put in place to cover the legalities of who fulfills them and all that kind of stuff, that's sort of out of my sort of domain of knowledge. But I think there are certain things that we can do as a profession. I say we, the royal we, landscape architects and stuff like that, that can do in our profession to sort of prepare and set up to enable the landscape management companies to make better informed decisions on pricing, management, manpower, resourcing, finances, all moving forward. And one of those things is ensuring that we provide or enable a much better understanding for those management companies as to what the design objectives are for these habitat creations. And then it's down to us to fall back on people, the ecologists and what have you, to assist us in preparing the management strategies so that these things can be just sort of far better communicated moving forward to enable these management companies to prep, price, and sort of successfully carry them out.
That sort of leads, there was a question that came in that isn't on the list from Rain Brooks of Brooks Estates about the training of maintenance operatives. Is that something that you think you could get involved with, is working with management companies and saying, this is what you need to understand because it's going to change? It isn't just have at it with a strimmer. That you're going to have to be more aware and more considered.
I mean, we've all seen the car park hedge trimmers being taken to everything with it and killed within a month of Sundays. I think definitely what you're saying is true. Then there's gonna be a point over the short term, and it really should be happening now and moving forward over the coming years as to how we engage with these management companies and what sort of resources we provide them. And I say we, in this instance, with the help of ecologists and what have you as well, to ensure that they are able to train, they do build their knowledge banks, and they become sort of custodials of, because ultimately it's going to, once it's all in, and like Ben's saying, every developer just wants to get away from the project. They don't want to be tied into it for any longer than they need to after handover. But that 30-year commitment needs to be sort of, there needs to be some assurances there, that it's and some guidance, and so I think we do need to engage with the management companies.
Okay.
And we do, and we need to make sure that there's a higher value associated with it. Right now, I don't necessarily think it's perceived as being a particularly sort of high skill, maybe sort of sector, and maybe we need to add some sort of some value to it in terms of what they're going to be charged with the responsibility of doing now with these.
I think that's how there's the difference between the bloke down the road who cuts down your tree and an arboriculturalist. It's actually they work in the same worlds, but there's just different knowledge bases, and where the management companies are going to need to introduce that, which again is just another cost back onto the.
And I think the thing is,
the developer.
we understand the value of it. Sat behind the desk here, we don't pretend to be the all-seeing, all-knowing. I have an arboriculturist that I speak to. I have ecologists that I talk to. We all depend on each other to collectively pool our resources, our sort of our intellectual resources. And this is just another thing that we need to really sort of get our heads around. And like I said earlier, once it's been experienced a few times, and and people sort of get into the momentum, and it's been there for a while, that knowledge will just become sort of hopefully ingrained in how we move it forward. Sure. And I know that's
okay. Thanks. Is this liability something that you want to run away from because you found the site and you've got the consent and it's over to your delivery team, or do you have a view on this?
Was that for me? Sorry.
No, that was for Mike. Just come on.
Sorry, I think I think it's quite right. The developer will want to build the houses and walk away. That's the truth of the matter. I think clearly if there's you need to deliver planning consent. So if it does get tied in to 106, then or however it is, then there's an assessment taken. But there will definitely be a desire wherever you go to be walking away clean at some point relatively soon, and certainly not have a legacy of 30 years and of costs, which, and to be honest, not all developers are even going to be there in 30 years' time. I think there's you've got some of the big boys, but smaller SMEs and so on, sometimes they're only around for a few years. So even if the developer was tied in, it doesn't actually secure it forever.
No, of course.
So the end answer is
You're going to cut and run.
Yeah, absolutely. That's ultimately the answer. And just being frank, there is the way that we're all going to try and get it.
That's your business model. It's build them, sell them, move on to the next one. Yeah. So it becomes an issue for the management companies who then take on the liability, and then obviously at the moment that liability is just unknown, which is.
So what I thought was really interesting is actually Jon's point about the liability in terms of SUDS ponds, etc. Yes, you want to, you don't want flooding and so on, but the fact that this is not just planning law, this is environmental legislation, it puts a different set of different onus or different liability onto the directors of the Manco. So that's going to be a really interesting route to go forward as well.
Yeah, just on that place, something interesting in the little pre-chat we had, because with my developer's hat on, I sort of take a fairly loosely skeptical view of new legislation that's coming through, new policies. We've been through the mill over the years of energy requirements and massively ambitious targets being set, and then those being diluted as we get closer and closer to the deadlines. And I sort of alluded to, is that where this is likely to go? And Jon made the point of this is law, this isn't policy. This will be managed entirely differently. So it's not something we should expect to just drift away. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just gonna wrap up on a couple of quick questions. One that came in is actually relevant to a site I did recently. We did a scheme that actually Jon's company G Consulting supported us on, where we put green roofs on the buildings, and this then contributed to the BNG calculations. Ben, maybe you can answer how, if I'd bought one of those houses, how I'm going to be legally obliged to maintain that, because obviously with a 30-year maintenance requirement, it's on my roof. Also, some of the hedges around the gardens will be within my curtilage, but they also contributed to the BNG calculations. What's going to be the situation for owners in terms of how are they going to be compelled to maintain that?
So my understanding is that the areas that count towards biodiversity net gain are going to need to be secured by a legal agreement or conservation covenant. So if you're going to have works, trees in gardens, boundary hedges, etc., included as part of the BNG calculation, my understanding is it would need to be secured, and that would seem to be unpalatable. I mean, in the past when we've been dealing with this, you don't count gardens as part of the open space. You don't mandate what people can do in their garden. Some people might do horrific things like cover it in fake astroturf. Others might turn it into a biodiversity haven, but you can't mandate. Every owner does different things. So I would be cautious of trying to include things which are in individual owners, unit owners' control as part of the BNG calculation, because securing that's going to be difficult. Saying that, some things might be integral. So it might be that the big hedge running down the side, it might be protected and might not go away, because it might actually then be maintained as well. It might be a key part of it all. But I would say that most things in gardens shouldn't be included, and I'm not quite sure how the green roof was, because I can see how.
I think, to be honest, I'm just sort of recognize I mentioned Jon in this, but it was actually something that came back from the planning authority, and they said, we want to include this, but obviously it's not. We're pre-legislation, therefore.
Indeed, so you can be more.
A planning officer getting very, very excited about it, but actually they can't tie it into anything yet. So it got us through the planning consent, but it's not going to be an issue going forward. But it is something that we need to, as designers, we need to just be aware. Nothing within, as you say, nothing within that curtilage should count.
Except gardens will always count. They will.
Okay.
It's part of every part of the development has to be measured as part of the game plan, and gardens are, but they're scored under a predefined criteria, and that allows for some people to pave it and some people to turn it into wildlife haven, and they assume an average across all gardens. So that's why you're not allowed to say, oh, well, in these houses we're having a wildflower garden, or we're having, or you're not allowed to plant trees in gardens and count it either. So the garden score is a fixed score, whatever, based on area size only.
Okay, yeah, it's just something that they're basically just taking a flyer on.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to wrap up with one final question, which is, there's been suggestion, I've read some probably scaremongering, that the current 10% requirement is being set by local planning authorities, or local authorities are looking at varying that to increase it. I can't imagine they're allowed to decrease it. Is that likely? Is that achievable? Is that legally challengeable? Is it deliverable? Where are your thoughts on that? John, your picture's in the middle of my screen, so I'll start with you.
So yes, you're right. Legislation will say you can't go below 10%, but the legislation also says that you can go above. So the local authorities are within their rights to ask for more, but it would have to be secured via top level policy, such as a local plan. So that would then go through all the consultation processes of any other local plan. Down here in the southwest, East Devon's local plan that's just been parked was pushing for 20% BNG, and that's up for developers and people who've got an interest to comment on the consultation and point out how hard that is to achieve and what that will do to viability, land values, etc., etc. So it can be done, it can be challenged, but once it's in a local plan, it would then have the weight of any other policy. And there are already authorities, I think there's one in Warwickshire where they're going straight for 20%. So it is going to go above 10 in some authorities for sure.
Okay. Ben, Warwickshire's up in your world, isn't it? Are you?
Well, Warwickshire's up in my world. Even Birmingham City Council, Warwickshire's been at the forefront of this for a while. Yeah. So yes, that doesn't surprise me. Birmingham City Council is mulling it over as well. They might go to 15 or 20%. I think the point to highlight is that the mandatory element of this is 10% biodiversity net gain. So when you get into the above 10% policy basis, yes, you're into, if it gets into the local plan, it's got the same weight as anything else, but it can also be negotiated. Right. So the viability, I mean, Natural England recently confirmed this as well in public, but actually the idea is that if it's above 10% biodiversity net gain, it's thrown in the pot with everything else. So it's not as, it doesn't have the same status that the 10% biodiversity net gain has, and that's the key point. So you'll still challenge it on the usual ways you would challenge it, but if that doesn't work, you could still use viability for the bit above 10%.
Okay, that's worth knowing. Tom, have you got any sort of secret magic plants or magic schemes up your sleeve that you can bump it up for us with? No, Tom's gone. Mike, have you had any? Do you in your appraising? Do you need to consider that? Are you looking at anything out of area where there's likelihood for excess of 10%?
To be honest, we're mostly Devon, Cornwall, and Somerset. So I was aware of East Devon, but that's paused anyway. So I think that's gone away for a moment. I think 10% is a challenge enough before we start. So
hitting 10% where none of the rules are really clearly understood and the implications aren't quite known. Yeah, that's challenging enough.
That's it. As with most things in planning, if it was just consistent and stayed as it was for a period of time, we'd all get used to it and we'll be able to deal with it. It's the continual changing and the not knowing that causes all of the risk. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That's our hour done, guys. Thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you to Ben, John, Tom, and Mike. Thank you to everyone that's joined us today. I think we've got up over 80 attending, which has been just remarkable. So I'm really pleased at the response we've had to this. It's obviously a subject that people are conscious of, aware of, worried about. I hope you found that useful. I've just been told that I should be introducing myself. Jon was very good earlier and mentioned his competitors, and I keep getting told off that that I don't present my business enough. So my name's Tony Horsey of Ortus, and we're property development managers based in the Southwest. We also run the Property Development Forum, which is what part of this is part of, which is a networking group, face-to-face principally networking group, where we run these events to drill down into more details, but predominantly it's just face-to-face, very informal. Our next event is at the Citygate in Exeter on the 12th of July. If you're interested in coming along, it's specifically aimed at property developers, landowners, property investors. And as I say, it's a very informal event. So if you're available on the 12th of July in Exeter, please check out the website and get yourself a ticket and come along. All that it leaves me to say now is thank you again to everyone. If there's anything that you want to follow up on, if there's any information you need, please drop us a line and we can put you in touch with any of our contributors, or if we can help you ourselves, obviously we will. But yeah, it just leaves to me to say thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it's valuable, and I hope you found that of use, and hopefully see you all again sometime soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.